And then the burn down chart is a very popular tool. It is what is prescribed by Scrum to use to manage, control the work that is, or the effort that is actually being spent on the on a particular sprint within the Scrum process. Whereas here, we've actually had a look at that, right? The cumulative flow diagram is what is suggested by Kanban. So that's different from the burn down chart. And then the sprint backlog is actually kind of reset. It is cleared and it resets every sprint. So every sprint has got a new sprint backlog. It cannot be the same. Perhaps you're doing the same pieces of work, you're changing, you're not able to update, but still you go through the whole process of sprint planning, of pulling the items from the product backlog into the sprint backlog, do a sprint planning, and then do the estimation, and then commit to the sprint backlog, and then start the sprint execution. So that way you're actually kind of going through the whole loop of going through the sprint backlog creation and backlog execution completion with every sprint. Whereas with Kanban, it's not the case. You have the Kanban board all the way through, right? So what changes is perhaps if items are moved, they keep moving from one column to another column once they're deployed, for example. Perhaps you can try and remove that, because you've achieved that it's not required to be tracked anymore. But for example, if a shopping cart is done, it's deployed, and you think that that is all complete, doesn't mean you take it off the board, because potentially there could be changes coming in the shopping cart in terms of the supplier, the vendor that you choose, or the way that you deal with the shopping cart or the payment or something like that. So you can still go back to the column number one. So with Kanban, it's persistent. The board is persisting across the sprints. So you can actually get to see the flow of work across the sprints from sprint 1 all the way through to sprint 100, if required. Of course, it is not always the case. And then the items must be broken down, estimated in Scrum. It's always the case, right? So we've actually looked at it, how you try and split the epics into stories, and using the invest principle, make sure that it's actually estimatable. We do estimation, the size estimation, the relative estimation of t-shirt sizing, or we do the planning poker. We assign the story points. Is it 3 points? Is it 5 or 8 or whatever, 13? And then we'll actually come up with a list of, okay, these are the kind of stories that can be done in this sprint based on the sprint capacity and the velocity, team velocity. Whereas in Kanban, there's no such rule. There's no such way to estimate the size, because you're not trying to do the estimation. There are no estimation techniques that Kanban prescribes. But we can try and use other methods where you have Kanban implemented within Scrum, and you're trying to use user stories, which is again a different technique altogether. It's not a Scrum technique. So that way it is, Agile is pretty flexible on that. You can still use multiple methods, but you need to take the best of those. You can't just say that I'm following Scrum, but I don't want to follow rules because I want to follow Kanban in that way. It still works, but then is it the most efficient way? It's not. So try and mix things and use the best practices, not the worst practices, and try and not use the loopholes from the other methodologies. That's the whole idea. And then, as we discussed, I think we discussed this at length in the last few sessions about how we move the stories across the boards in a Scrum project. So the Scrum team works, and the product owner helps the Scrum team, and the Scrum master would help, again, assist and enable the Scrum teams to update the stories. They move the stories and the tasks from one column to another column within the board. And this is what would be used in Jira or Trello.